Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. I was updating my GPS maps this week in preparation for a trip to Toronto, and to my horror, I realized that I will have to make a whole series of left turns, but I'm going to try to avoid them because, as you know, I'm so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. That means this is not a safe space for those of you who may be easily offended by having your ideas challenged or by our satire. This is broadcast number 120, and we have this week Bill Honsburger, missionary to the New Age with Haven Ministries, to talk about Wicca, the Parliament, and Evangelicals. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. Here is Ronnie.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw a shadow, and now there are 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this webcast include the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet, and the Designer Jesus Collection. No longer do you need to be embarrassed by your church's Jesus. Visit one of the runway locations for the Designer Jesus Collection at a church near you. And if you like our webcast, or if it just annoys you and you want to inflict it on somebody else, please, to ensure continued access, go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. So here we are, program number 120.
120, isn't
10
it?
dozen programs. I'm shocked.
I'm shocked. Yeah, I'm shocked that they let us keep doing it. That's the best part.
Yeah, they don't know we're doing it. They're not paying attention.
They're not paying attention. You know, they're just, and we're too broke to pay attention too. So
I was going to say, we're obviously not offensive enough. Maybe we should work on that.
Yeah. Well, you know, we have our moments. We just sneak it by them. You know, one of the blogs I did, this was kind of interesting to me, is I was writing about Islam, and the title I wrote is it was a quote from let me see, who's like the father of psychiatry? What's his name?
Freud.
It was a quote from Freud. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. That was the title. It had nothing to do with cigars, had nothing to do with smoking or tobacco. It had to do with Islam, but Facebook wouldn't let it go because of the title.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, okay, wait a minute. It was for, okay. Well, you could have just, what could you have done? I don't know.
Well, you know, I did the whole appeal process. I did all of that kind of stuff, but it just never didn't go anywhere because the title was offensive. And I said, you know, but it's just a quote from, you know, now maybe Freud is offensive. I mean, that's real possible, but that's probably not what you're alluding to. So anyway, we have our friend Bill Honsburger, who's been on before, missionary to the New Age. Love your hat there, Bill.
Thank you, sir. And by the way, Haven Ministry, we talk not only to New Agers, but Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, witches, Scientologists, Urantia, Eckankar, everybody. Atheists.
You don't discriminate. You will pick on anybody.
That's absolutely right. We will harshly judge all that come in for us.
Even flat earthers? You talk to flat earthers too?
You know, I've had actually a conversation with one of them. You know, it's one of those, we're going to talk about witches today. When I first got appointed as a missionary to New Age people originally, the idea of talking to witches was ludicrous. I mean, I watched Bewitched and, you know, and the shows growing up, and that's all a joke, right? Nobody takes it seriously. And then I went to my first psychic fair and ran into them. And so all of a sudden, wow, this really is something growing and a big issue. So when I heard last year that there's a whole big thing with flat earthers getting a hold of a lot of young people, I'm like, oh, come on, you're not serious, right? And then I run into one. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. We're so dumb.
And just out of complete coincidence, this year's ACT scores were the worst like ever. You know?
I'm sure that's completely a coincidence because public schools are doing their finest with our money.
It's the core curriculum can't be failing.
No.
Yeah,
it's not a pretty picture.
So you were an equal opportunity picker honor.
Something like that, yes.
as is Midwest Christian Outreach. And for those who are unaware, we have talked about this a little bit before, but for those who are unaware, Bill and I, our first acquaintance really was at the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1993. I had never been to such an event, didn't really know they existed. And in fact, I don't think they did really exist prior to that.
100 years before.
100 years, right. And Bill came in from Denver and had a room there, and a bunch of us showed up, and we brought tracts and things like that, and just kind of dispersed throughout the entire event. It was an amazing place. If you feel called to be a missionary and you want to talk to people who are open to talking about spiritual things, this is the place to be. Now, we're not affirming that what they believe is true. In fact, we are pretty confident for the most part they are not. But they are open to discussion and dialogue very often. Would you agree with that, Bill?
Sure. And I think one of the amazing things, I always view the parliaments, I've been to 3 of them now, I view them as target-rich environments as a missionary. Where can you go relatively cheaply and talk to people literally from all over the world, from all parts of India, from all across the Middle East, Europe, Australia, everywhere. And they're all in one place for 8 or 9 days. And it's an amazing opportunity to share the gospel. And one quick little conversation, I've always been thrilled about this, is that I got to talk to a Sikh fellow he's actually from Amritsar in India, which is the Sikh headquarters for the planet. And I'm like, what if this guy believes? What if the Spirit grabs him and he believes, and he goes back to literally the center of the Sikh universe, a place I'll never be accepted. Mm-hmm. And he shares the gospel, and God does something amazing there. So I've always been thrilled with that, just as an opportunity.
It's like shooting fish in a barrel for you, isn't it?
In that respect, yes. But as Don can tell you, when you go, every 10 feet is a new booth with an entirely different worldview. And the first time I went to Chicago, where I met Don and several others, here's the Zoroastrians. There's not that many. There's only a couple 100,000 of them left. They're based in India now. They were run out of Persia by the Shia Islamic people. But then there's right next to them is the Sikhs, and right next to them is the Jains, and just so many groups that I'd read about, studied about, actually taught on, but never in my life expected to meet them because they live in India and I don't get over there very often. So they're right there in Chicago. And you could talk to the Sikhs for an hour and talk to the Jains for 2 hours or whatever. It was an amazing opportunity as a missionary.
Yeah, and for us, it was the same thing. We had not anticipated going, frankly, the first time. But a radio station in Florida, a friend was a host of a program there, a talk program, contacted me and said, you guys got this Parliament of the World Religions going on there. We need a daily report on what's going on. And, would you enjoy go? And our initial reaction was, well, I don't really know what would it be like. And we were concerned about the expense. He said, I have press passes. I'll send you just go. I want to report every day. And then we went, and we were, Joy, especially afterwards, was like, I wish I had gone every day. Because there are so many people to talk to. There's the sights, the color, the sounds, like Bill said. There are people that you learn about their belief systems theoretically for what we do. But to actually sit down and talk with them is a whole different experience.
Yeah.
Because you get to, you get to interact live and ask questions. Why do you believe this? And we did that, especially with the Wiccans. That was, in fact, that's part of the topic again today.
Well, they were the heroes in '93. They were the most celebrated of all the groups in '93.
They were. Now, in Salt Lake City in 2015, the American Indians seemed to be the most celebrated group. So they sort of pick a religion to showcase, let's say.
Yeah, well, we were in Melbourne, it'll be 9 years ago now. Indigenous, Australian folks were the heroes of the whole thing. So they do pick out a particular group and kind of elevate them for that time.
Yeah. And the two that I've been have attended, the Jains seem to be right at the entrance. They set up a little mini temple sort of thing. So when you walk in to register, almost the first thing you see is a little Jain temple there.
Yeah, my wife has a picture of this, the temple in Salt Lake. It's so funny. The goddess statue is extremely white. I mean, as white can possibly, whiter than me. I mean, it's very white. And I don't mean that as a compliment. Anyways, it's like very white.
Does it have white privilege too?
It must.
Probably use a white privilege toothpaste even.
So there's people bowing down and worshiping and praying to it, stuff like that. Well, Terry took a picture from the backside. So on the backside of the picture, you look at the statue, and it's being held together by red duct tape. Duct tape. What can it do? It can even
What can't it do? It can
even hold your God together. It was just so poetic to see people bowing down in front of it and seeing duct tape holding it together. And I had this Isaiah moment, like, why are we such fools?
That's amazing. So do they do any like funny dances in these parliaments of religion? Do you get any really good choreographed moves to take home with you?
I would say more free flowing or live streaming type dances would be. You do see a lot of that, but it's not choreographed. It's kind of like going to a Grateful Dead concert without the without the semi decent music.
I could give you a little bit of a flavor of what things might look like. I think I can get away with this. Let's try that.
Oh, that's some scary people.
There we go. And who is this that we're looking at here?
Well, that's my beautiful wife, Terry, and that ugly guy in the middle is me. And then on the left is Miguel, who is a member of the Arancha Readers. We've actually talked to him since that was at Salt Lake. We actually have talked to him several times over the last couple of years, had lunch with him stuff, and I hope to do that again. He's a very nice man. He's a great guitar player, and he's incredibly confused and incredibly arrogant about the Arancha book. So that's an ongoing conversation that started that very morning.
Right. Okay, and then we have now this is what?
The Galug Pa. That's the Dalai Lama's boys, the banana hats.
And they do what I call a bullfrog song. It's not exactly a song, but very low chanting.
Oh,
now those headpieces. Those headpieces they wear. When I first look at them, I associate them with like South American Native Americans or something, but those are from Nepal or what? Or from Tibet?
Tibet. But the Tibetans were all over Siberia, and a lot of the people you'll see in other places came from Siberia, and that's an even scarier picture right there.
Okay.
That was an Indian mission thing there, so we're going to stop.
That's awesome. That. Yeah. No, the Dalai Lama's boys are there to cast a spell. They build a mandala, a sacred symbol, and they have gazillions of little pieces of cut glass that are all different colored, and you meditate and you put one piece of glass in there, and there's literally millions. One piece of glass, one piece of glass, one piece of glass, and there's a whole bunch of them. They'll do it the whole week before the Dalai. So they're probably almost ready to start doing that now because it casts the spirits into the parliament and will help them, the Dalai Lama's message to go out or whatever it is that they're hoping the spirits do for them. But that's what those guys are there to do.
Mm. So
and you have the exhibition hall. They don't have exhibitionists, but they have exhibitions going on.
Oh, they're not going. So.
No, and like one of the ones I stopped at last time in 2015 with our friend Bill McKeever was Circle Sanctuary, which is one of the Wiccan groups. It's the oldest 501c3 Wiccan group in the U.S. Actually, they're tax exempt. And I had, they're about 2 hours north of me up here. They're up in Wisconsin. And I had asked them, and I said, sometimes we do training because we want Christians to actually understand live and personal what it is that various groups believe. And so I was sort of thinking maybe we should bring some of them up to your place. They have 200 acres up there. To kind of talk with some of you all, and you could show them around, show them what sort of rituals you do, those sorts of things, and talk to them. And she said, "Oh no, I don't think you could do that." And I said, "Well, okay, why would that be?" And she said, "Well, you're always trying to evangelize us."
Darn.
Yeah.
When that happens.
I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. Isn't evangelism simply the attempt to persuade somebody to embrace what it is that you believe?" And I noticed that you have a table here in the exhibition hall. I suspect it is to persuade others to accept what it is that you believe. Wouldn't that be evangelism? And she said, "Oh, okay, I guess you can come."
Hoisted on her own petard.
Yeah.
I would say there are exhibitionists amongst them. Some of these people are salesmen. They really are. you talked about the dances earlier, Ron. One time at the Salt Lake one, I took my wife and 2 or 3 other of our staff to a meeting held by Matthew Fox, defrocked Catholic, now Episcopalian priest, whatever. He's a pagan from way back. And so we go in there, and everybody's freaking out because they've got all these nature gods that they're on sticks, they're parading around. And it was this huge parade that just put on basically a house music disco type beat, and it's just pounding while people are walking around dancing and everything, and putting their hands on each other's chests, to feel the blessing from each other and share the blessing with each other. And we're like, no, thank you. And my wife's trying to get the heck out of Dodge. She is really freaked out, and it is tough. And I look at these people, I'm like, Terry, don't worry. These people need the Savior. That's why we're here. We're not here to worship the spirits. Right. And they would worship the spirits of the North and the spirits of the West. And it was all sort of choreographed, but again, it had more of the feel of a Grateful Dead event than anything else. People are just doing their own thing. Somehow collectively, this is all worship to the gods. And it was good to have a Catholic priest there to throw some rigor and discipline into the activity.
Uh-huh. Well,
let me show the website here real quick so that people get kind of a flavor for what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Because before we get too far into this, I do want to ask Bill a question about this. So we have the promise of inclusion, the power of love, pursuing global understanding, reconciliation, and change, Parliament of the world's religions, for a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. What could be wrong with those kinds of things as an ideal, as something to try to accomplish?
I would say it's sustainable until Revelation 22, and then that kind of goes down the drain right there. Yeah.
Well, I will tell you this. I had, just in a generic way, Don, to address your question, in Chicago, it was even more. You have Robert Mueller, former Secretary General for the United Nations, and he's all about one world government, and we need a one world religion. And he's not subtle at all. I don't know if he's still around, but he was pushing that hard, and he was the keynote speaker for the opening, day of the Parliament, all this kind of fun stuff. So this idea, there's one world government that will cure all our problems, and there's one world religion. If everybody subscribes, well, we'll have no more problems. And then Hans Kung, very famous Catholic scholar, gets up and he does a thing called Toward a Global Ethic, where if we could just all adopt 4 of these, ethical concerns: don't murder, don't rape, don't lie, don't steal. If we could just adopt these things, we'd have one big happy world. So that was certainly the motif that was so popular, is that we can do it. We can make this happen. And I was telling somebody about this the other day. When I left Hans Kung's presentation, I walked out, and right behind me is Erwin Lutzer from Moody, and then Hans Kung. And so I hear some racket, some noise behind me. I turn around, and Dr. Lutzer is talking to Dr. Kung. And so, I'm having a fly on the wall moment here. And this was fascinating. And I was so proud of Dr. Lutzer. And he looks at Dr. Kung and he goes, Dr. Kung, all you basically did was restate 4 of the 10 commandments. And Kung's like, well, yeah, okay. And he goes, we've never been able to keep them. We've never, ever, ever been able to keep the law. Even if you just narrowed it down to 1, we haven't been able to do it. And then I'll never forget Dr. Kung's response. He goes, I just choose to have more hope than that. And I remember being struck by that statement. It's like, on the basis of what human experience, what human experiment would you say that, yeah, we can do this? So all of this stuff is all a facade, Ron. They had several groups pull out over the global ethic. The witches were mad at the Christians, the Orthodox and Catholic.
Really?
The Jews were mad because Farrakhan was invited in with his bunch. Right. The Greek Orthodox were mad because the pagans were there. I mean, it just fell apart. So all this stuff, it was actually a riot in Chicago. All this stuff about one world religion, all sounds good on paper until you get people around each other. And you find out they're not all inclusive. What an idea.
And if you make do not steal one of your main ethical mandates, how can you have a one world government? I mean, where's it going to get its money from? And then the Mueller guy, I mean, didn't you like hack him off, or one of you got, either you or Don? Was he the guy that you got really mad at you?
Yeah, he's great. He's at Stephen Z at the Parliament. He yelled at me in Colorado a year or 2 later when he came into Denver or up in Evergreen to speak, and he was screaming at me. I think I told you guys that story. Well, again, the funny thing is he's half my size and twice my age, and he's screaming his head off at me. And all I did was basically bring in the G word. You know, he was trying to create the one world government. I told him, you know, it doesn't matter what government you try. We've tried every kind of government that can be imagined. But unless you deal with the fact that we're, you know, separated from God because of our sin, and that's why we do all these terrible things to each other. As soon as I started bringing that up, oh, he went ballistic.
Right.
And you religious people are a problem in the world. And, you know, wow.
And that's like everybody around him, right? It was a religious person.
Every sort.
I've come to the Parliament of Religions where it's full of religious people to give them hope, but really religious people are the problem with the world, you know.
Well,
so
Ron, he did offer hope both at the Parliament, and he offered it at the meeting up in Evergreen, because there's all these spirits up there that if you just ask them in, I mean, this is word for word. If you just ask them in, they'll change you and everything will be better.
Nothing religious about that, of course.
No, not at all, of course.
No.
Well, talking about one world religion, one of the things that they want to try to accomplish is to align with the UN, to be an extension of the UN, and have what they call religious ambassadors. And there's a group that has created costumes to that end. And so you have, these are all chaplains, religious ambassadors of various religious groups, with a little symbol here, and pretty colorful. As long as you don't say that there's one absolute truth. As long as you don't do that, you can be a religious ambassador.
Yeah, that's the only absolute truth, but we don't want to get into that.
And can you zoom? I was going to ask you to zoom in on those symbols there. I was wondering if they put the Islamic symbol right next to the Hindu symbol. Is it right next to the Hindu symbol? Is there a Hindu symbol on there? I don't know.
Yes.
But you know, so you got every religion represented there has been killing members of the other religions since time immemorial. But somehow we'll get them all together.
That is what started the fight in Chicago in 1993, is the Hindus and the Buddhists. I mean, the Hindus and the
Sikhs. The Sikhs.
Oh, the Sikhs. Okay.
It was the Sikhs that had the Hindus go ballistic, and off you went, because they've only been killing each other for 500 years. That's actually a short range.
That's all? Oh.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't that long before. It was less than 10 years before when Gandhi, who was the PM of India at the time, ran tanks into the Sikh temple, the Gurdwara, and so then two of Gandhi's bodyguards, note to self, if you're going to attack a religion, don't hire them to be your bodyguards, because two of her bodyguards killed her for that. So there's a lot of tension, has been for a long time. And so the Parliament's right on top of that, and it went ballistic. That's when the riots started.
So here's my question. I want to go back to this. We've kind of danced around it a little bit. Is it the case that we can hold to our belief systems and tolerate someone with whom we disagree? Can we do that?
Well, can I read you somebody who says he comes from a people that does? This is Vivekananda. This is the opening statement from the 1893, the original Parliament of Religions. Blah, 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 blah. He says all sorts of stuff. My thanks also to some of the speakers on this platform who, referring to the delegates from the Orient, have told you that these men from far-off nations may well claim the honor of bearing to different lands the idea of toleration. I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. He's a Hindu. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true. I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and refugees of all religions and all nations. I wonder if the Sikhs would say, yeah, that's that. And the Buddhists would say, yeah. And the Dalits who have become Christians and others would say the same thing as the Hindus, the different Arya Samaj and all these different groups, which make it a point to attack them and kill them. I mean, it's just amazing. There's the claim. And so what does most people in the United States know about Indian Hinduism? That would be nothing. So you can make these statements all day long, as he did. But you know where he got his thing? He was listening. He was tripping out on meditation, and Mother Kali, the goddess of death, came to him to teach him the oneness of all religions. So there's your authoritative source.
So that wasn't a traditional Hindu belief already, the oneness of all religions and the truth of all religions?
Well, that's part of what, it's hard to call it Hinduism because it's hundreds of millions of religions all under one name, which the British basically gave to them a couple hundred years ago. But, when the Muslims invaded 12 centuries ago, it was bad then and it's bad to this day. There's been 6 wars between India and Pakistan. And since you have a large number of Indian people who are in fact Muslim, 150 million is the estimate, there's been violence as long as I've been alive between these two religions. So I find it fascinating that, how many people bought into this idea and the parliament. In fact, when Don and I were at the second parliament, they kept talking about Vivekananda. He showed us the way and all this kind of stuff.
Now, we have a viewer here, Mystic Witch, who says several things, Bill.
Yes.
First, greetings, and we're glad they're with us. Maybe it's time to end the bigotry and stop the killing, respect each other, coexist. Absolutely, we can. So I'm glad Mystic Witch is with us. And as I said when we began, I had invited a goddess and never got a response. We tried to contact some Wiccans to be on our webcast and have gotten no response. We do have generally good conversations with Wiccans at the Parliament because they're open to these kinds of discussions. So I don't know of any Christians who are killing any Wiccans, for example. So I'm not sure exactly how that works.
I don't have it on my calendar.
Well, John, you remember years ago, right after the Parliament, in fact, I put out a paper turned into a seminar called Why Not Burn Witches?
Right, which we published in our journal, as a matter of fact.
And it was based on the idea of what, not only what I read from Starhawk and all these different witches, but actually talking to people, Don Frew, and from the Covenant of the Goddess, and listening to Phyllis Carroll from the Covenant, and talking to all sorts of witches during that week. And again, like Don was just saying, I had a great time talking to them. And Eric Pimenton and I spent about an hour and a half with Donald Frew, getting his 2 cents in on things. So yeah, it's very possible to love each other, to be tolerant and accept each other and not kill each other. I'm all about that. The problem I had is what I bring up in that paper is if you're going to say that the goddess is in all of nature, you want to proudly wear the umbrella of a nature religion, which is what most Wiccans will say. It's a pre-Christian nature religion. Okay. Then nature teaches you your values. So where in the heck does nature teach you, for example, to love your neighbor? Nature teaches you to eat your neighbor, especially if they're old and slow. Nature does not teach you to love your neighbor. Even if you want to point, well, this species doesn't. Yeah, okay, but look at the totality of nature. There's a lot of great things going on in nature, beauty beyond belief. But it's violent beyond belief as well. And so if you're going to embrace nature religion, this is where I think the Hindus have been more consistent than modern pagans here in the U.S., most of whom are former Christians that I've talked to. Fine and dandy, be a pacifist. I think it's a wonderful thing. But then you can't embrace nature. If you want to embrace nature, what the scholars talk about, then you have to embrace sacred sex, sacred death, or sacred dance, and then sacred death. It's sacrifice. The death has always been a part of nature. And so our Wiccan friends are left with a dilemma. I want to be a pacifist. I don't want to hurt anybody. And I believe them. I don't think they do.
Some of the Wiccans do embrace sacred sex. Not all, not even most necessarily, but at least two that Joy and I interviewed do embrace that. Now they're selective, obviously, but because within Wicca, pardon?
I don't even know what that term means. What are they talking about? Sacred sex.
Well, it's for some of them, it is part of their ritual, and so they have someone else that they become intimate with as a religious ritual in order to become in closer contact with the god or goddess or both.
Someone they're not married to and do not have any long-term relationship with.
Yeah, in the long term of this, Ron, scholars have talked about the fact that when you have sex with a temple prostitute, just for example, to pull Wicca out of it for a second, in the ancient cultures, they have the other nicknames, fertility cults. So the belief is that when you have sex with the prostitute at the temple, you're actually regenerating nature. So you're helping the fish to come back into the river, the deer to come back into the forest, helping the corn grow, or something like that. That's what nature religions really are.
Keeping global warming at bay, things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, honestly, if you pick up any Wiccan spell book, and I was just looking at a bunch of them at the Psychic Fair in Colorado Springs this weekend. It's all the same stuff. It's all how to do this and do that. It's very pragmatic. And if you do this spell, and so for some of them, sacred sex is enough. But if you don't find that working, then you have to up the ante. And sacred dance is about inviting the spirits in, or the goddess in, the spirit of Diana or whatever. And then if that's not working, the old pagans said, well, this is why why the Azteca kill people and hold up their hearts to the sun, to make nature work, to make sure the sun comes back. So modern Wiccans, we're going to talk about the Christian thing. Well, I'm reading the statement from Mystic Witch.
While you're reading that, we're going to take a short break because Mystic Witch is giving us some dialogue, which I'd like to address.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's just
Ron,
take,
why don't we hear from one of our sponsors?
As I'm doing this, you guys can look over what this person is saying. But in the meantime, we have some questions. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word, the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to look into the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. At the Bible Buffet, everything is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, truth claim-free. All of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. This week's regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. Yes, the Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience. So,
and this is kind of fitting for the Parliament, because as we talked about before we went on, we have Jim Wallace and others who really do like the Bible Buffet, sort of pick and choose.
I see them there all the time. Yeah.
So, Mystic Witch, by the way, I would like to extend to them, if they can contact me off the air, maybe we can work out a time to have them on the webcast with Bill and Ron.
Hey, I'd like that.
Sure.
I really do, because one of the things that they are saying, and I know that this is true, not of them necessarily, but I know that this does happen, is that they said they have had death threats received in live chats just like this. They've been told, burn the witch. They've been told that they need to be swinging from a tree. There are uninformed Christians, or maybe
I don't know if they even qualify as Christians, but they claim to be Christians.
Yeah, the problem is, Ron, and we've talked about this before, is we had I like the word spate, a spate of books years ago, a whole collection of books that were untrue about Wicca, Satanism, and those kinds of things. In fact, Bill mentioned our discussions with Donald Frew, who was a PR guy with the Covenant of the Goddess. And one of the comments he made, which kind of gave direction to our conversation, was that Christians are liars. That was what he said. And we said, that's interesting. Why would you say that? Well, Mike Warnke wrote the book Satan Seller, which is completely untrue. Johanna Michelson, who did
The Beautiful Side of Evil.
The Beautiful Side of Evil, and her accounts are untrue. And as he's going through it, I was thinking of, now this goes back a long time, on the Mike Douglas show, they had Michael Aquino, the guy who started the Temple of Set. On with.
After that, did you switch to Lawrence Welk? Okay.
I'm telling you. Well, it was an interesting program, because they had Michael Set and Johanna Michelson on debating these things. And as it turned out, I discovered later, Michael Aquino was telling the truth, and Johanna Michelson was not. And so Christians, unfortunately, get their information about what others believe from unreliable sources.
Yeah. And, it's like there is there's a level, or there are pockets within the church that gravitate toward this kind of thing. Like, I'm thinking back I remember when Mike Warnke was popular. I mean, I bought one of his albums, I thought he was telling the truth.
So did I.
His main thing, though, I didn't realize at the time that by the time I had purchased his record album, his main thing was kind of like doing a comedy shtick. you know, whereas in years earlier, he used to show up at all these events, Christian events, and he used to bring these displays where he was showing, you know, shrunken heads or whatever. I don't know what he was showing, but all these witch warlock related things that, of course, were, you know, he was apparently never really involved in, and a lot of it really didn't have any connection to what Wiccans and witches actually do, I guess. It's all been kind of exposed and refuted. But he kind of, when he became more popular, he had softened his message. And of course, the witch story was there. It was basically the cornerstone of his testimony. But it was more about, I listened to it more about for the comedy routine, you know, and of course for the touching story of how he allegedly came to the Lord. And, you know, now, back then we didn't have the web. We didn't have electronic books. We didn't have a variety of ways of checking into somebody's story. You know, the news cycle was much longer than it is today. It took years for, and, you know, you have to give credit to Japuza. You know, they sent a couple of people, did some investigating, and, you know, and they exposed what he was doing. I have a feeling that nowadays you'd find just as many people being suckered into it, probably, but it would be more quickly exposed.
Well, it's like what Abraham Lincoln said: you can't trust everything on the internet.
Right. I remember when he said that too, because I was on the radio, I think, at the time.
Yes.
Yeah, it was. There's just so many. I mean, just think of all the flat earthers today. You know, I mean, and I encountered one on a Facebook group, and she's arguing with me and saying, well, I've researched it. Well, where did you research this? And then she gives me a bunch of really off the wall websites. That's her research. People don't even know what research is anymore.
No. And I would say to Mystic Witch, you know, part of what Haven does is not only do we talk to people like him or others, we also try to instruct the church. I've done seminars on witchcraft from the Philippines to Guam to all over the United States at churches and schools and colleges. And like I do with all the religions, it's in my missionary interest to tell the truth and not to give up false representation about what they believe. Every witch I've ever talked to, like the first word out of their mouth, I'm a witch. The second word's, and I don't believe in Satan. I get it.
Right.
because the Middle Ages, the medieval thinkers did think that way, that you had power because you were in league with the devil if you were a witch. But I know there's a distinction. The witches and the Satanists that I've been around don't like each other, don't want anything to do with each other, blah, blah, blah. I get that. So when I talk about witchcraft, I represent them by using their original sources, the conversations I have as well. The same thing I do with Islam or Buddhism or anybody else. And so I'm trying to help the church understand what they're actually dealing with as opposed to the caricatures in some of the books you were mentioning. I mean, Satanism in the 80s, I was a youth pastor. Boy, there's tons of books on this, and most of them just had nothing to do with reality.
Right.
I don't think they'd ever talked to any Satanists. You know, they might have seen a video of Anton LaVey on TV or something like this. So part of what I think for Christians, we go back to the parliament, part of what's helpful for Christians to be at the parliament, I mean, my number one reason there is to evangelize, but it's also very helpful to listen to people, to talk to them. Here's what the Sikhs really believe, not what some book said. Here's what the Muslims, and you were saying this earlier, Don. There's enough internal conflicts amongst the Muslims, amongst the Jewish groups, the Buddhist groups. I talked to Theravada, one of the first monks in Chicago, and he starts going off on the Mahayana, which is the majority view. I mean, people are different. These beliefs are different, and it doesn't help anybody. And I say this especially to Christians, to bear false witness is wrong. It's always wrong. So when I talk to witches, I'm not interested in saying what some alleged, authority says. I'm going to say, here's what your authority says, right? Is that right? If I'm talking to Don Fruit, isn't this what the Covenant of the Goddess believes? I mean, here's their stuff. Same thing when we're talking to Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or anybody else. I'm not interested in giving them books that they're not going to read anyways. I'm interested in quoting their people. And so, but oftentimes, they have a nickname in world religions about the cafeteria Catholic. Mm-hmm. And the typical model is, well, I like what the bishop says about birth control, but I don't like what he says about nuclear war, or something like this. So pick and choose. My experience is that that's most people. Most Muslims don't take everything that Islam formally teaches. Most Buddhists don't. Most Mormons necessarily don't. So sometimes you have to talk to this person and say, well, what is it you think about that? Do you really think Joseph was a true prophet of God? Do you really think Brooklyn speaks for the world? You know, do you really think Muhammad was, you know, was the final apostle or whatever? And you ask them, and sometimes, and you listen all the time, and sometimes you find out, wow, I know what the church formally teaches or the religion formally teaches, but this guy's not that guy. He's into something else.
That's true. That's true of most groups. There's some Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, they all believe the same thing because their group teaches them line by line, this is what you must believe. But for the most part, I've talked to Muslims, many Muslims, who've never really read the Quran.
Nope.
They would be sort of equivalent to a C&E Catholic, Christmas and Easter. I mean, they do kind of holiday things.
It's a human phenomena.
Right, you're right. It's a family tradition, a Muslim by family tradition, but they don't really know what Islam teaches.
Oh, I've talked to innumerable Buddhists from all over Asia. I've asked them, what do you think of the Four Noble Truths? And they all look at me going, what? And I mean, Hmong, Cambodian, Vietnamese, Thai. It's the heart of Buddhism. And they've never heard the phrase. I'm much more likely to find the Four Noble Truths from a Catholic turned Buddhist here in the States than I am from talking to a Vietnamese Buddhist.
And so the irony here is you're at the Parliament of World Religions, and some of them, it sounds like they're defensive as soon as they find out you're a Christian.
They are.
And because they've been used to being stereotyped, and of course falsely stereotyped. And so they're going to look at you and say, well, all you Christians think that and so, okay, so they're stereotyping you. The irony is the stereotyping goes both ways. You know, it's like every Christian or many.
But by being in the same geographic location, this is what's really nice about this kind of an event. I've had a couple of our supporters contact me and say, why are you going here? Are you kind of, you know, it's kind of sort of like, are you going to the dark side? No, this is a mission opportunity. We get to go there to people who are spiritually interested. They are spiritually engaged. No, we're not saying they're seeking God in the way that we would understand it, but they want to understand something about the world and are willing to talk about it, even if you disagree, if you approach them in a cordial way. I mean, the first parliament I went to, and Bill can attest to this, there were Christians outside. They did not come into the event. You know, huge signs.
You're going to hell.
Yeah. You're going to hell. That's right. Exactly. Always. Big bullhorns. Repent or you're going to hell. And it just didn't seem like that was going to be a really effective way to communicate.
Well, why would you say that, Don? I mean, come on.
You know, and we had the same thing when we go to the psychic fairs for years. Christians, especially the one in Colorado Springs, Christians were up there with their signs and yelling at people. And I'm like, you know, instead of that, why don't you pay $5, come inside and treat people like human beings? Actually talk to them. You'll find that goes a lot farther when you can talk to them like an actual, hey, take them out for lunch or coffee or something. Treat them like a human being made in God's image.
Those people with the signs, of course, they're probably the source of many stereotypes about Christians. I would guess.
Sure. I'm sure, but you know, it's like when we first met with the the Covenant of the Goddess. Of course, we spent a couple of hours with Don Frew, I think, going through these issues. At the end of which he said, "If I thought being a Christian is what you guys were, I would do it. But I think you're an anomaly." Well, that's tragic if that's what he thinks.
Yeah. Well, because you can't base, you know, how many people have time, opportunity, and motivation to stand outside a Parliament of World Religions picketing it, you know? I mean, that's a very small percentage of people.
But if that's the only exposure to Christians.
Right. But think about especially the motivation aspect right there. I can tell you the vast majority of Christians I know are totally not motivated to do something like that. But a lot more of them are motivated to do something like what you're doing, if for no other reason, just to satisfy curiosity. Gee, I wonder what these people believe.
You know, one of the this is a church issue for me, and fortunately, Bill periodically calls me to remind me God loves the church because I get exasperated with it. Is there's not sufficient actual teaching of the body of Christ, not only about their own faith, but what other groups believe. And so many Christians, I was talking to someone in church this Sunday about the Parliament and mentioned about spending time with the Wiccans. And he said, you know, we used to have a neighbor that was Wiccan, and I was afraid to talk to her. And I said, why? Well, I don't know what she believes. And I said, see, nothing to
Because
be
I don't talk to her.
What you need to do is to get informed, because
Yeah.
what she believes is interesting. I would say
I'm,
it's
I'm
false,
afraid.
but
I'm
it's
afraid to
interesting.
talk to her because I don't know what she believes. Because I don't talk to her because I'm afraid to talk to her.
Exactly right.
And
so
Ron, part of our strategy we teach at Haven when we go to these events, and there's a lot of events that have these booths, you know, and everybody's there to tell you about their religion.
Right.
So what we tell our staff to do is, hey, look, just go up and say, hey, what's this all about? It doesn't matter if you know everything about it more than even the person they're selling. It gives them the opportunity to do what they're there for.
Mhm.
They get to share their religion, and we listen.
Now,
And
some
so
people,
after we listen, we sit there and go, can I ask you a question about some of the things you said? Oh, of course, because we've already been gracious enough to let them tell us what they believe. And we're also listening to say, okay, has it changed? Like the JWs prior to 94 or the Mormons prior to 78. You know, religions change sometimes. There's whole new things. So we're listening. Is something new here?
Mhm.
But mostly it gives us the opportunity to be gracious and civil, let them share what they're there for, and then we can ask them questions and start getting into a conversation and a dialogue with them. And it opens up. I've gotten far less screaming events like Dr. Mueller than I have just going out, you know, yelling at them with a bullhorn or sign like you were talking about.
I think some Christians are afraid that they'll be converted, or that they'll be persuaded.
Maybe so. And so what does that tell you? That means they need to get more educated. And so the church needs to step up to that. When the first one I went to was 93, as I pointed out with Bill. I was intrigued I still am intrigued by Wicca. But I went and met with one of the places, and Bill was up there too, and Stephen Z and Joy and a bunch of us, to the Fellowship of Isis. Now, Lady Olivia, who founded it, she's since passed away, was an interesting person from Ireland, has this wonderful Irish brogue when she talks, Episcopalian. Her and her brother founded this group, the Fellowship of Isis. And I said, why did you start this? And she said, well, Isis is the goddess of 1,000 names, and so you can worship Isis as Mother Mary if you're Catholic, or the Holy Spirit if you're Baptist, or, you know, she just went on and on about that. And we ended up talking for her for probably 2 hours, interviewed her and asked a number of questions. You know, is what you're worshiping a Jungian archetype? And she just went off on that.
Oh, really?
How would you like to be called a Jungian archetype? And, they're actual beings that she's communicating with. And then after that, for the rest of the event, anytime she saw me walking from one place to another, she would track me down and say, can we have lunch? Can we have dinner? Because she was interested in talking to someone who who disagreed with her, but didn't condemn her outwardly, you know, just with you're going to hell sort of sign.
Interesting. Now did you have something else?
No.
Oh, okay. You know, I mentioned earlier the stereotypes that other religions have of Christians, and some of them, of course, are explainable by, you know, the picketers and so on. But also they have their own views of who Jesus is. And so I guess I'm wondering, is there a commonality? I mean, you've got these hundreds of religions, but they all have to explain Jesus in a way differently from the way the Bible, especially the New Testament, explains him. And I imagine there are a multitude of different views on Jesus, but is there a commonality that you detect? How do they fit? Do some of that? I mean, I don't know of too many world religions that eject him completely.
I can't think of any. There's a commonality to me, Ron, is that everybody seems to have to put him into their mix somehow.
They had to account for him, and they want to account for him in a positive way.
Yes.
But they change him. They change
always.
Yeah.
I mean, you got Thich Nhat Hanh, famous Buddhist monk, living Buddha, living Christ, where he co-opts Jesus and turns him into a Buddhist. You got Deepak Chopra many times. Chopra says, oh, no, he was an avatar of Vishnu or Shiva or whatever. Muslims, of course, call him Isa, second highest prophet, who was not crucified, was not resurrected, is not the Son of God. Jehovah's Witnesses, he's the Archangel Michael. Mormons, he's the highest of all beings. He's the oldest brother who was, and I won't get into all the sex stuff with that, but everybody I know of, and I've met many witches. Again, a lot of them were former Christians. many witches who want to push Jesus into the mix. Now, interestingly, the lone exception to this that I've seen in talking to people is some of the stronger Orthodox Jewish groups. They hate Jesus with a passion. And there's history to that as well. The Talmud brings up Jesus. He's in a vat of excrement for eternity, stuff like this. Yeah. So they're the ones that don't put Jesus into the mix. If they do, it's a false prophet.
Here's why I think they do that. I think that they want to have the good Jesus keeping seal of approval.
There we go.
Yeah. You know, somehow if we can attach Jesus to what we're doing in some way, that gives us a seal of approval. Now we're legitimate religion because we keep Jesus involved in some way in what we're teaching.
Yeah. So you can see how, I mean, it's bad marketing and it's bad PR to be against Jesus. And you can see how the extreme Orthodox, or, you know, more hostile Orthodox groups have suffered on the PR front, you know, and on the anti-Semitism front, so to speak. Not that it's right to persecute people just because they disagree with you about who Jesus is, but that's what happens, sadly.
Yes, historically. I grew up in a neighborhood of Jewish people in Los Angeles, and, you know, Polish Jews, Russian Jews. My whole neighborhood's filled with Jewish folks. My high school was nicknamed Hebrew High, and nobody was religious in any way that I could ever tell. Nobody wore the tassels. Nobody wore the yarmulke, the skull cap. Nothing. It was very, very secular, and they, at least from when I was raised, they had no religious cares one way or the other any more than I did. When I became a Christian in the middle of my senior year, my best friend, who hadn't seen me in a year since I'd become a Christian, I went over to his house and he opened the door and he's so excited to give me a big old bear hug. This is my best buddy. We used to smoke dope together. We played basketball together. We were good friends. And then I disappeared. So I come back. Now I've become a believer. And I go inside and his parents are smoking dope. He says, "Bill, we got some great Acapulco Gold. You're going to love it." I'm like, "Oh, crap. I started him. And now he's got his parents smoking dope." And so I'm feeling terrible. And I said, "Chuck, I don't do that anymore." And he goes, "Why?" He was shocked. Eyes were huge. I said, "Chuck, I became a Christian." He literally grabbed my arm and walked me out of the house. He's completely non-observant in any way, fashion, or form. But I had said the swear word of all swear words.
Became a Christian.
I had become a Christian. And to them, that's identifying with 1,000 years of anti-Semitism across so-called Christian Europe and Russia, you know. Right. And I didn't understand it at the time. I understand it now. I teach on it now. But again, Christians are ignorant many times. And you go back to the Middle Ages, they're even much worse than they were today. They never even had the Bible to read, except for the scholars who could read Latin. So yeah, ignorance, go back to what Don said earlier, is a massive problem inside in church, and I would argue even bigger outside. Yeah, as the parliament reflects that.
Now, we were talking about including Jesus, and sometimes you have to kind of remodel Jesus to really make him fit. And
well, that's what all these religions are doing, right? Yeah. And it's kind of become a trend in the church too, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Well, you know, we have a sponsor who can leverage that for the benefit of your local church. If you're interested, would you like to hear from him?
Yes, absolutely.
Why not?
Why not? Okay, well, let's ask some questions here. Do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways in the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and of course, Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Just please remember to observe the attendance requirements. Cost of admission, your eternal soul, required attire, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection, London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City, and coming to a church runway near you.
Yeah, church runway near you. So one of the things that Mystic Witch said is, for me personally, I don't care what someone believes. I just care if they're a good human being. Now, I guess I have a two-part response, and maybe one of you guys or both of you guys want to jump in on that, or all over us, or whatever. I do think that we need to be more accepting of others that we disagree with. Certainly, we need to live as best a life as possible. The problem I find is that there is an absolute truth, and we should find out what that is.
Well, that statement presumes an absolute truth.
Yes,
you can't make that. You can't make that statement without assuming that there's one absolute definition of what a good human being is.
Some standard by which you determine that, right?
What if a good human, what if I believe, you say you don't care what I believe as long as I'm a good human being. Well, what if I believe that good human beings burn witches and put Jews in ovens? What if I believe that? So now suddenly my beliefs do matter.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so what standard are you subscribing to, and how do we determine that? Is there a God to whom we're accountable? Can we be good enough to merit acceptance by God, if that's the case? And if not, what's our alternatives?
Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, I think somebody might get frustrated with the way I framed that, but because the comeback, I think, would be, well, what I meant was, I don't care what people believe on metaphysical issues, on things that are beyond the five senses and can't be proven. I only care about things that people, I care about how they act in the realm that can be proven. The problem is how we act in the realm that can be proven is based on what we believe. For example, are we going to be judged someday for what we do? If I believe that I'm going to be judged for my sexual behavior, and that the being who's going to judge me has very specific ideas of how I should behave sexually, I'm probably not going to engage in sacred sex.
Hater, racist, Nazi.
I know, but I'm just saying that that's probably going to have an effect on my behavior. You might not agree with the effect, but that's just the way it is.
Well, that was actually the heart of my paper, is what you guys are talking about now. And the witches, for the longest time, they've dropped this now in the last 5 or 6 years, but for the longest time they were running with Gerald Gardner, who's kind of the modern originator of witchcraft. That he claimed that 9 million witches have been killed during the Middle Ages, and that's historically just a farce in so many levels.
However, hardly enough people to be.
Yeah, most of them, 3/4 of Europe died in the plague. So, anyways, we do what's called a reductio argument. You just start with the other person's point of view. Okay, on the basis of witchcraft, there is no absolute right and wrong. And every witch I've ever talked to said, yes, that's exactly right. Because nature's filled with these things, as we talked about earlier. So on the basis of that, if there is no such thing as absolute right and absolute wrong, then why can't me and my buddies run up to Boulder and fry a few earth mamas? After all, that's my culture. So does culture determine my reality? Does self-interest, that's the egoist model? Are we just emotives? You're just going to cry about witches, but so what? I like to kill witches. No matter which way you put this together, the only way to make sense.
If I was a Wiccan, I'd say, well, but the Wiccan Reader 3 says, and harm none, do as you will. So you can do what you want as long as you don't harm anybody.
Well, that's the fun thing. Harm is such an interesting word. So, for example, this last week, last Saturday, I believe, there was a group of witches calling basically out the spirits to hex Justice Kavanaugh, and may his children die without their father, and all these things they were chanting. So I'm so interested. I showed this to my staff on Saturday. I'm so interested that all the Wiccans I've ever talked to talk about, we would never do a bad thing. We only do good magic, white magic, not the evil black magic, the Satanists. Yet, I don't know, when you're calling for somebody's death, it's interesting, Don, how you translate this word harm into real life. It's kind of flexible, and that's the joy of it. So you can flex your way into stealing somebody's wife, as Hollywood does on the Lifetime channel or a zillion other things, every single day.
Isn't it, though, the case that if truth is relative, not absolute, and varies from person to person, that the Wiccan Reader 3 might be true for the Wiccan, but not necessarily true for you?
Again, if the Wiccan's belief about morality is the case, then you can't criticize the Inquisition. You can't criticize the witch trials at Salem or in Europe for following out what their conscience told them was right. So it's back to what you were saying earlier, without an absolute standard. See, I think it's wrong to kill 1 witch or 9 million witches. Why? Because God says, love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. Does not call Christians ever to kill people in order to save them, or whatever stupid rationale people had in the Middle Ages. It calls us to love our enemies because Jesus died for them as well.
And so when they come back and say, well, we teach that, that sounds just like our belief, what you're saying there. As a Christian, maybe there's a better response than the one that comes to my mind. But as a Christian, I would say, yeah, there's a passage in the Bible that talks about Satan disguising himself as an angel of light, and his followers, his ministers, disguising themselves as ministers of righteousness. So yes, they're going to, these ideas you're talking about that you say are yours too, really are counterfeited from the one source of truth.
I think a good word would be plagiarizing at this point.
Plagiarizing, yeah.
Yeah, this is why, again, I go back to the jungle. If you're going to say that nature is your guide, fine, great. Let's start right there. Where does nature say to love your enemy or your neighbor or anybody else? And all the old school pagan religions had no problem with sacred slaughter or sacred death.
Right.
They had no problem with it all. It's the modern, now I say formerly Christian, formerly Jewish pagans and stuff like that want to hold on to the Christian values, that they abhor the source of it, but they still know they should take care of the poor. Why is that? Because they have a conscience that God gave them. That's Romans 2. They know the law.
Now I'm really concerned. I think when I meet a witch, I'm going to have to ask them, are you an old school witch? Or I don't want to be slaughtered.
Hey, Don, do you remember that article I sent you on sacred abortion 20 years ago? It was really on this very point.
That's right.
And how the Wiccan, this is in the Beltane papers, a very famous, at the time, very popular Wiccan magazine, talking about how we need, at the end of it, she's talking about how we need to embrace the wholeness of Kali, the destroyer, because there's too many people on the planet. And I'm like, my gosh, she's calling for sacred death again. And so it was done synonymously, so nobody could go after her. But I thought, are the old school paganism, is that coming back into the mix now?
Sounds like Al Gore's
philosophy. You know, we are running over time now, as we often do.
Did not notice.
Yeah, unfortunately,
that means we're having too much fun, way too much fun.
We do have fun. But this is an important discussion, and we'll need to revisit it again in the future. In fact, I had asked Mystic Witch, they're going to try to get someone in contact with us to come on and talk about these things.
That'd be great.
Because I really believe, and Bill and Ron, I know that you're committed to this as well, it is important to know what others actually believe. Because if we don't, we're not having an actual discussion or dialogue. You're just talking at somebody.
And we're probably not even being heard as a result.
You're right.
It's
you're not
disrespectful. It's disrespectful to misrepresent someone else's views.
Right. So it may be, and it likely will be, that we won't agree in the end, but at least if we can have a respectful discussion about it, we can be heard, they can be heard. We can say, we're concerned about your eternity. It isn't just this life. It's what happens after you take your last breath here that we're concerned about. But if we don't establish a common base of discussion, we're not going to get anywhere. So to do that, you need to talk to people and say, as Bill pointed out, what do you believe? They may be a Mormon. We would say Mormons are not Christian, but we do that on a historical, biblical basis. And we can talk about that, but we have to understand what they believe as an individual, because they may be a Mormon simply because they were socially engaged, not because they believe Mormonism per se.
Right.
But you don't know that until you talk to them.
Exactly right. And again, we always say, you know, Ephesians 4:15 says to speak the truth and love one to another. And I know that's written to the church, but we also think it's a great attitude to have with everybody you talk to, whether they're Buddhist, Muslim, Mormon, Wiccan, or anybody else. Love these people. They're made in God's image. Share the truth with them. They may not like that, but we're not going to do it. We're not going to be jerks. We're not going to scream at them or threaten them or anything. We're going to engage with them and talk. And I think it's exactly what the scriptures tell us to do.
And that is what we try to accomplish at the Parliament of the World's Religions. So if you are a believer and you want something to pray about for the next few days at least, pray for us. We're going to be arriving there, October 31, and it starts November 1. and runs through November 7. There's going to be, I don't know, 10 or 12 of us. I think Scott, our friend Scott, is presenting again, I think, there. So that'll be fun.
Who's that?
Scott Matcherts. I think he's putting in a presentation. He did a presentation last time in 2015.
Salt Lake. Okay, sure. Great.
So that's, yeah. So, Ron, do you want to walk us out of here?
Okay, I've had a great time. I hope everyone else has too, but let's give credit to where credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services chef is Hammond Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Paul Gummus. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is OD Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping, and our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, but you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never will. And we do thank Mystic Witch and Aaron Lewis and Elizabeth Ashby and the others who joined us today. That was good. And Mystic Witch is going to try to contact someone to come on with us in the future, and that'll be even good. So, yeah. Bill, if you want to hang on when we end this, I want to ask you a question, and Ron,
sure,
as well. And the rest of you, see you all.
Thank you.